Hello everyone, and welcome back to the StephSewn channel. If you're joining me here for the first time, I am so excited to have you. So today's video is going to be a little bit different because rather than sewing, we're going to be talking about knitting. I've actually kept this channel almost entirely sewing focused so far, but I've had some lovely comments over on Instagram requesting that I share a bit more about my knitting projects. I've actually known the basics of knitting for about as long, maybe even longer, than I've known the basics of sewing. I started both of them when I was very, very young. Was very lucky that my mom and grandma taught me how to do these things. To be honest though, I think that I just genuinely lacked the patience to complete a knitted sweater until I was in my 30s. Kind of make of that what you will, but that's my personality. Lately though, I've really enjoyed having a cozier craft, something that I can do while sitting on the couch watching a movie, something that I can do while traveling, which was a big focus of my summer this year. Sewing is so much faster than knitting, but it's just also a bit more isolating. Certainly it's less portable. Anyway, I have 3 completed garments to show you. These are all kind of sweaters, long sleeves, very much autumnal and winter knits, and I have a few small whips that I'll be able to show you as well. This is going to be my first foray into kind of the knitting video podcast world, so I'm really excited. Let's get into it. So first up, we have the sweater number 14 V-neck by My Favourite Things Knitwear. This is an oversized drop shoulder sweater, and it has a deep V neckband, and it's knit at a heavier gauge, so 16 stitches to 4 inches on 6mm needles. My Favourite Things Knitwear recommends you hold Knitting for Olive merino held with 2 strands of Knitting for Olive mohair, but to be honest, I don't like that much fluff, and it's also too expensive. I'm not buying 3 different yarns to knit a sweater. As an aside, I still have some sticker shock when it comes to knitting. Before you come for me in the comments though, I am fully aware that there are cheaper yarns out there than the yarns I'm choosing to show you in this video. I have, there's no hate, you're not going to get any hate from me about using cheaper yarns, about using acrylic yarns. There's bigger problems in the world than, plastic pollution from knitting. But I think the sticker shock comes from the fact that I'm just a bit spoiled from sewing projects. Especially living here in London, I can get pretty good quality fabric quite cheaply, as cheap as £2 a meter. I go to fabric swaps. I mainly use vintage sewing patterns, which I buy for like £2 a piece. But a knitted sweater is going to take me, 20, 40 hours, and it's just something that makes me pretty fussy about my yarn choice. It's something that I'm willing to invest in. So with that fussiness in mind, I knew that I wanted something with a bit of texture, a bit of tweed, and rather than just kind of digging around on Ravelry, I tried to let the Instagram algorithm do the work for me. So I basically found pics of tweed yarn on Instagram and just kept liking them until the algorithm delivered me the ads that I wanted to see. The yarn I ended up using is Lanagatto Everest tweed. You can see here, this is a 95% wool and 5% viscose for these tweedy flecks. It's really pretty. And I held that with a strand of Mahjong pearl mohair. You can see these go together quite nicely, and I was just really happy with the resulting fabric that got created. If I didn't mention, the Mahjong mohair came from my favorite London fabric shop, which is called My Ivory Room. I was able to hit gauge on 6mm needles, so it was really just smooth sailing. As you can imagine, this knits up quite quickly, especially at this needle size, so I was really in the beginning flying through this one. I didn't make any pattern adjustments to it beyond doubling the width of the neckband. I didn't like the sort of thinner neckband. I thought that it just sort of slid around the shoulders, and I like the wider neckband that My Favourite Things Knitwear uses on her cabled sweater, the sweater number 20. However, I ran out of mohair, and I was like 1 ball short. Initially I had bought all of the balls in this color that My Ivory Room had in stock, but when I went back to purchase another one thinking that she might have restocked, I learned that Valentina, she's the owner, she'd actually stopped carrying Mahjong. Again, as another side, I love Mahjong products. I think the quality is excellent, the colors are stunning. To me, it's just a much better variety of really bright and intense colors than Knitting for Olive has. But Knitting for Olive is just, it's way more popular. It's way more popular, probably for good reason. And so I definitely respect Valentina's choice to switch from Mahjong to Knitting for Olive for her mohair and merino. So I needed my 1 stupid ball of mohair. But Mahjong they're based in France. They don't ship to England without a minimum spend of like £50. So thank you Brexit. What I should have done immediately was just order my ball of mohair and get enough yarn for a second knitting project. But rather than just bite the bullet and do that, I started just buying random dark green mohairs to see if they'd match. And they did not. So I have the examples of this here. This is the mohair I used. I tried getting 2 other mohairs after seeing the images online, and it's hard to tell yarn color online. This is Gepard at the top, and then I got some knit picks, and you can see, especially the knit picks is close, but it's just not the same. This situation actually stopped me from working on this sweater for about, I want to say like 5 or 6 months, just because I got so annoyed about it. I kind of get worked up about this sort of thing. In the end, I did what I should have done in the beginning, which was order directly from Isager. I got some summer yarns from them, which I used for other projects. Perhaps I'll show those in a different video when it's more seasonally appropriate. It was definitely a lesson learned though about not playing yarn chicken when you're not sure that you can buy more of the yarn. I should have just used a different colored mohair in the beginning. Also, I know myself. I'm really fussy when it comes to all of these sewing and knitting projects. Even if the other mohairs had been a bit closer than they were, I know it would have bothered me. Even if I had just done the cuffs with a slight difference, which maybe could have worked, it would have bothered me. It would have bothered me to switch them. Anyway, I'm very happy with this sweater overall. It's fluffy, it's cozy, it doesn't itch, and I just can't wait till it gets slightly colder so that I can wear it a bit more. The only thing that I might change is that for the cuffs, you can see these cuffs are quite baggy. And this is something that's just like a feature of the pattern. I've seen lots of sweaters do this. As someone who is, I'm a bit messy, I think that I would rather have something that's just a bit more fitted to my wrist. So what I might do, just given the fact that I have time before it gets really cold, is just undo the ribbing or frog the ribbing, do some rapid decreases right before the ribbing starts so I can just have a bit of a tighter cuff. In terms of sizing, this design comes in 3 sizes, which to be honest, that's not great. I'm still kind of learning about the knitting sizing landscape, but sometimes I find the size limitations a bit surprising. It is oversized though, so the max bust circumference I think in this pattern is about 55 inches. I certainly would not call it a size inclusive pattern, especially again considering the really large increments between sizes. It's not including people both at the top end of the size range and at the smaller end of the size range. But you know, it's not terrible. And it's a really solid design. It was an easy pattern to follow. This was only my second knitted sweater, so I'm still really happy with it. I'm gonna go ahead and change though, just because I'm starting to overheat. So next up we have a slightly more kind of autumnal transitional piece. This one is also from My Favourite Things Knitwear, and it's her blouse number 2. This one is a pretty simple long sleeve. It has a wide boat neckline, but what makes it so interesting, of course, is the lace pattern. This design was super fun. I've only knitted one other lace thing before, that was a pair of socks, but I found this to be super easy to memorize, and it was a really great travel knit. In terms of gauge and yarn, this is a DK weight pattern, so I think it was like a 19 stitch gauge on 4mm needles. I used Rama Petunia for this. Just getting a bit closer, it might blow out a bit, which is a Pima cotton yarn, and also the recommended yarn for this pattern. I was pretty nervous about using a plant-based yarn, to be honest. I used the Knitting for Olive Pure Silk last year for a camisole, and I was really disappointed about how much it stretched out. Like I'm not going to use it again. I feel like the resulting camisole that I have is like basically unwearable. I mean, obviously I would probably use it for a different type of design, but I don't want something that just like slowly expands in width and never in length. Luckily, Valentina, again, I'm going to keep mentioning My Ivory Room. It's a store that I love. I buy most of my yarn there. She really assured me about the stability of this yarn, and she was absolutely right. This has been washed a bunch of times and it's still holding its shape nicely. Construction-wise, this one is again knit from the top down. There's really not much going on after the shoulder shaping. It's a pretty boxy fit, as you can see. But one of my favorite details is that it has these faux seams going inside the inner arm. It's also down the side, and again, they're not real seams. You're just doing some funky little stitches there to make that design detail. One thing that I am annoyed at myself about fit-wise is that I know I have a really short torso, and I also know that especially the Scandinavian knitting patterns are designed for people who are just taller than me, even if I didn't have such a proportionally short torso. So initially when I started, I connected this in the round, I started knitting the sleeves, and I realized that the armhole was just like way too deep on me. It looked weird. I had a lot of excess fabric flopping. It was pulling the garment off my shoulders. And then of course, when I raised my arms, like the whole sweater came right up. It was not a good look overall. So what I ended up doing was frogging the sleeve that I had started, and then I sewed up a bit of the armhole and then picked up stitches again and started just knitting the sleeve as normal. it was a totally fine fix. I'm fine with how it looked. You can see that basically the faux seam looks a little bit weird because it becomes an actual seam for like 2 inches maybe. But I was only annoyed at myself just because armhole depth is one of those things that I would always change on a knitting pattern. Like, I know it's something I need to adjust, so I just need to start being a bit braver with the knitting and know to make these adjustments as I go. Like I said though, very straightforward design, and it's finished with a simple I-cord edging at the neckline. This in the pattern is optional, but to be honest, I couldn't really imagine not doing it. Otherwise, this would slip right off of your shoulders. I do have to tell you though about a pretty grim incident that happened when I was knitting this sweater. So like I mentioned, this was a travel knit. I knit most of this when I was on that trip to France. I did a video on that trip and the garments I made for it a few months ago. We took the train back from Lille to London rather than Paris just because the Olympics were happening in Paris at the time, wanted to avoid that whole craziness. I was alone in the train station. I was guarding all of our luggage while Josh did a power walk through downtown Lille to like look at buildings, do whatever. I was like done with trip at that point, so I sent him off by himself. I was happily knitting away, and suddenly I was like covered with this cold slime. It took me a minute to realize what had happened, and it turns out that there's some, I don't know, big, horrible, I assume very sick bird who had done his toilet. He'd done his toilet all over me. And I don't mean here like, oh, there was a little bit of shit on my shirt. My hands were completely covered. My knitting was covered. It was on our luggage, my phone charger. People around me actually screamed. The only silver lining of this horrible incident was that there's an older French woman next to me who just screamed sacre bleu. And I've never actually heard a French person say that. I feel like it gets referenced all the time. So, you know, small victories. Everyone around me was very helpful and very kind. They were offering me tissues, they were offering me hand sanitizer. But in the same way that an infant can't fight Muhammad Ali, even if it tries really hard, this was not like a use a little hand sanitizer and wipe it off with a tissue type of situation. Obviously, because I was alone with like 2 people's worth of luggage, a bunch of shopping from antique stores in France, I couldn't just leave it and go like clean myself in the bathroom for 10 minutes. So I had to call Josh, wait for him to like sprint back. Then I was able to go basically do like a weird train station bathroom half shower. I'm just very, very lucky that, and of course I changed my clothes. I was just very lucky that it didn't go in my hair, as you can imagine. I have a lot of hair. I don't want to sit on a train with bird shit in my hair for like a 2-hour journey back home. But the sweater, of course, was one of the wounded. It really, really got splattered badly. So basically, by that point, I think I had done the sleeves and I had obviously connected the body and the round. So I was more than halfway done. And so I put all of the stitches onto waste yarn and I washed it with dish detergent. This was not a situation where like I could put it in a bit of wool wash. Like I really, really wanted to get it clean. And obviously like, I don't want dirty bird stuff on my sweater. Of course I was worried that dishwasher detergent was gonna screw up this yarn. But actually it was completely fine. It was a strong vote for the quality of the yarn. It was very color fast. And I was just so relieved that it worked out because I was so far along. If I had screwed this up, I would have been really upset. Anyway, it's obviously not an experience that I hope to repeat, but I still like my blouse, even if it does remind me of a slightly unpleasant experience. So the last sweater I have to show you is probably my favorite of all of them. This is the All Fall sweater from Casual Knit Studio. So again, we have another oversized sweater, but construction-wise, this one is a bit different than the first 2 I've shown you. This is actually knit bottom up, and I really enjoyed doing that more than I thought it would. I kind of like that you start with the maximum number of stitches on the needle, and it feels like the knitting gets faster as you go. This design has some really, really fun, I think quite professional details, particularly at the shoulder. It is sort of a saddle shoulder, but because you're knitting from the bottom up, she has this very clever way of just building out this shoulder panel. I've never seen the technique anywhere else. It's not something, you know, I don't want to give it away or explain it, but it's something that I would love to try again. It feels like from what I see, it looks like it's something that she does quite a bit with her patterns. In general, I just felt like this pattern was full of tips to get a really professional finish. I was a particular fan of how you pick up stitches for the neckline. You end up with a very clean finish there. And she also had some tips to get like a nice rib knit at the collar and at the cuffs. This sweater is knit at a DK or like light worsted weight gauge, 20 stitches per 4 inches on 4mm needles. I did decide to really treat myself with the yarn here, so I held a combo of Gepard My Soft One with Isager Alpaca One. I'll just get a bit closer. The My Soft One is in this taupe color, and then we have the Isager Alpaca One in this gray. I think that they look really nice together. For those of you who are used to my style more broadly, you'll appreciate how weird it is for me to like make something beige. I like my bright colors, my intense colors, but I'm actually so glad to have such a nice staple in my wardrobe. I also feel like the fabric that this created, because the My Soft One is really, really light, it's almost unspun, and of course the Isager Alpaca is really soft. There's just like a nice texture to it. I love the slight marling effect that you get from mixing the gray and the beige together. It is also worth saying that I actually test knit this one. This was my second time test knitting, and I got to meet a lot of wonderful knitters in the process of doing that. I really enjoyed being in the chat. Now, I appreciate that people do have some very strong feelings about test knitting, and I completely get it. I mean, in this case, the turnaround time was a bit fast. I think we had 4 weeks for this, and I would never have attempted this if I hadn't been on holiday for like a major portion of that time. I was aware that I was going to have a lot of time in airports, sitting on trains, sitting in the car. This was during Josh and my trip through Spain. So it just felt like I was going to have a lot of time to just sit and knit. I also do love a little bit of poolside knitting. I'm also someone who's trying to build their presence in the online craft community. I like meeting designers. I like getting into the nitty-gritty of technical details. So taking on a test knit like that at that specific point did work for me. However, we have to acknowledge that in a test knit, especially a test knit with unsponsored yarn, you're easily taking on, like, again, potentially 40 hours of work, a bunch of back and forth with a designer. You know, you're getting a pattern that's going to have mistakes in it. That's the point of test knitting. And you're paying for the yarn on top of that in order to then receive a pattern that costs like $10 to get in the first place if you just waited for the thing to come out. Unsponsored test knitting is just a bad deal. Like, it's a bad financial deal. If you're doing it for that reason, like, there's definitely other ways to get something that costs $10, of course. I don't really have a problem with it, but I would like to see more knitting pattern designers do what sewing pattern designers do, which is just, one, give people more time, and then also just offer something else in addition to getting the pattern for free at the end. So for example, the last two test sews that I did, which took like 10% of the time it took to knit this sweater. At the end of those, I got like multiple free patterns from the designer shop. In one case, she gives out like a $50 gift card to her pattern shop. And I do think that that's something that should be offered by more knitting pattern designers, just because, again, people are taking on so much work, and it can make sense if the yarn is sponsored. You can get some very, very high-end yarn. You're potentially saving like $100-200 on the yarn. But in general, like, doing all of this basically for free made sense for me at this particular point in time. I wouldn't, encourage people to do that if they feel negatively about it, or just because they feel like it's a popular thing to do. Like, it's just not worth it for that reason. In this case though, I had a lot of fun with this test knit, and I'm really glad that I did it. In general, I felt like the designer was communicative, she was respectful of feedback, and it was also just so fun for me to see the differences between countries in the test group. We had a really diverse pool of people, and there were folks like me, used to English patterns from the US, from the UK, saying things like, oh, maybe add more detail here, clarify this. Whereas some of the knitters from the Nordic countries were saying that they actually found the amount of detail in the base pattern overwhelming, and that they were used to more streamlined patterns which are more open to interpretation. The reason I'm making this like a Nordic countries thing is that multiple people said in Nordic knitting patterns we have less detail. So this is not my interpretation, I'm just kind of reporting what I heard. It was just really fun to see the quirks of different local markets, and as someone who maybe wants to have a knitting pattern someday, maybe wants to have sewing patterns someday, it's the kind of thing that I like to understand. Anyway, this sweater was a delight. I'm so happy with it, and it's actually the one that I definitely want to make again, although I'll probably size down. I do love how cozy and oversized this is, so it's perfect for this attempt, but probably for the next one, we just want something like a little bit more fitted for the office. All right, to close out, I do want to show you two of the whips that I have in progress. If you don't know what whips mean, it's work in progress for those who are new to the term. I have two whips to show you. It is worth saying that I tend to not want to be a knitter who has lots of things going at once. I would probably just not finish any of them. I know myself. And also just because of the fact that I don't want to buy lots and lots of yarn until I'm sure that I have a project for it. Because I'm kind of new to knitting, I'm still learning about the yarns I like, the types of garments that I like, and I just need time between projects. And I don't want to buy a bunch of yarn and then realize later that I actually don't like it or I don't have enough for the project, blah, blah, blah. Also, I have enough fabric. I can hoard fabric. I don't need to hoard yarn. So like I said, I have two whips in progress. The first one is a sock project. We'll start with a small one. For those who watched my video on my craft haul from Spain, you might remember that I stopped in Girona and went to a shop called Knitting Girona and bought a fun, I think majority plant-based yarn. This is the Lana from Casa Sol Handmade. And what I really like about this yarn is that it's 20% wool, 30% nylon, but 50% viscose. And unlike, I think, most majority plant-based yarns, the elasticity of this is amazing. It's super soft, it's really springy, and I had wanted to make socks from it. I got this ball of like the sandy brown color, and I got a ball of a dark green. So I'm very pleased to report that I finished the first of my DK weight socks. This one, I mean, it feels weird to say that I designed this sock myself. I know how many stitches I like for a DK weight sock, and I just picked a pattern from the old Vogue stitch dictionary that my mom got me for my, I want to say like 12th birthday. You know, I've genuinely had this book for like 20 years. And this is probably the first time I'm really using it. But you see, you got to start kids young. They'll get there eventually. So yeah, this is a broken rib sock. It's super soft. Clearly I haven't worn this. I mean, the second sock isn't done, and I wouldn't put a dirty sock against my face. But I'm really pleased with this, and it is so stretchy and soft. This is actually a little bit smaller than I would normally make a sock. I have like really big feet. I'm a US 10, and this, because it stretches so much, I knit it to the normal length I would knit socks, and I realized it was going to be like flopping around at the top of my foot. Very happy with it though. Can't wait to finish it. I think I'm like 20 or 30% of the way through the second one, and I'm going to wear them for a bit, see how they wear before I knit up this second ball, just in case it does wear badly for socks. I don't want to then like have to unravel them or end up with two pairs of socks that are falling apart. The other project I have going, probably slightly more interesting to most people, is another sweater. This is I'm at this awkward point knitting a top-down sweater where it kind of doesn't look like anything. Did I? No, I didn't. I didn't pull the needle out. This is the Estelle sweater from Paula Strict. So you can see here that I've done the back, I've done part of the front panels, and I'm about to join in the round. We're getting very, very close. This is a lace pattern again. I really enjoyed the lace pattern in the My Favourite Things Knitwear blouse, but I think I'm good with 4mm knitting projects for a while. I wanted something that was a bit more instant gratification, so this is knit on 7mm needles. It's going very, very quickly. I've cumulatively spent like just a few hours on this, and I've made great progress. So again, let's see if I can show that lace pattern. Very pleased with this. In terms of yarn, I'm holding yarns double again. This is the Gepard Puno in this pretty red color with the very bright, it's my favorite color that Majogarn offers. This is their pearl mohair in the poppy shade. So together you can see this is quite a bit brighter than this red, and I just think it gives the overall design a bit more definition than it would have if I had matched these more closely. She does recommend, the designer recommends Puno for the base yarn with a strand of mohair, so again, it's just working quite nicely. I'm hitting gauge, there's kind of no problems there. The only criticism I have of the pattern is the size range again. It's worth saying that, like, I think I have not, advanced is not the right word, but I've been in the sewing community long enough to, at least for me personally, understand my expectations around the size range to be offered. Knitting, I'm newer to, I'm a lot less familiar with the process of designing a knitting pattern, whereas with sewing, I got a lot of pattern drafting books that I read fairly frequently. Like, I know that I'm not a pattern seller, but like, I kind of have a sense of what my expectations are for pattern makers of different sizes. With knitting, I still am kind of figuring things out, but this Estelle sweater only comes in 3 sizes. And I think in the future, it's just not the kind of thing I'm going to buy. I don't like the idea that I'm knitting something and couldn't go to some of my close friends and like recommend that they try it. It just doesn't sit right with me. And so I don't think that like every designer needs to offer the full spectrum of sizes for everything. There's others who are building to that. But like a 3 size pattern, especially for something that's not super oversized, it just doesn't sit right with me. So going forward, it's just something I'm going to be more mindful of. Either way though, very excited to get this one finished. This one probably more of a project or like finished object knit as opposed to a process knit. I'm enjoying it, but like I really am going to love the finished project, I'm sure. Anyway, I hope that you enjoyed this video, that you've enjoyed talking about knitting with me. Just because again, this is my first fully knitting focused video and I'm really just excited to see who's going to come to the channel, who else I can get to know, and I really hope that you enjoyed it. One thing that I would love to know, and you can let me know down in the comments below, is if you're a monogamous crafter or if, like me, you dabble around in lots of different crafts. I know that I'm very lucky. I think that probably I got started with sewing and both sewing and knitting with my mom and grandma when I was around like 5. So I've had a long exposure to this stuff, but like I still took like 20 years off from knitting. I think it's like a good success story. Start them young, they'll come back to it. Don't be afraid if your kids don't seem interested in something now, because you know, later down the line, you never know what's gonna happen. I'll be back soon with another video. I know I'm always really unreliable because my ideas change so much about videos. One thing I do wanna do though, I don't wanna say the C word, but Christmas is coming. And I'm a person who actually loves making handmade gifts for people. Not for everyone, not everyone deserves it. But there's very much a way to do it that's painful and horrible, and there's a way to do it that is really, really fun. And I want to share those thoughts with you. I have lots of pattern recommendations and ideas, things that you can make for people without knowing their size necessarily, but that doesn't feel like kind of random crap. And yeah, I think it's time to talk about that. Better to, you know, start in November. If I, a procrastination queen and an impatient queen, can do it, so can you. If you do want to hear more from me, you can of course subscribe here, but you can also follow me over on Instagram where I'm at the same handle, just StephSewn. Have a wonderful rest of your week and I'll see you again soon. Bye!